If you've ever wanted to build your own MetaTrader 5 automated trading bot, this series is for you. You only need a couple of things in order to complete this episode. Firstly, make sure that you've completed the MetaTrader Connect episode that I posted up last time. That episode shows you everything you need to connect to MetaTrader and retrieve the data that you'll need to construct the 50,000 candlesticks. And secondly, make sure that you've installed the Python Pandas library. I'll show you how to do that in the next scene. Installing Pandas into your project couldn't be simpler. To do it, just run this command, pip install pandas. Don't forget, if you're using Venv, do it straight into your virtual environment. Okay, in order to get the information that we need from MetaTrader, there's a couple of steps that you need to walk through. The first one, which really catches quite a lot of people, including myself when I first started out, is initializing the symbol. Now, if you haven't initialized the symbol, what will happen is when you run your code, you'll go through all of the building stage, you'll run it, and you'll just get this weird thing that the code wasn't able to retrieve the data. It's super odd. So the first thing that we're going to do is to initialize our symbol in MetaTrader. So the first function, go to your mt5_lib.py file and add this function in. I've called it Initialize Symbol, surprisingly. You can see here that the first thing that I do, as always, is to make sure that I comment what I'm coding, what am I creating. That'll really help me when I return to this code in a few months' time to explain to myself what I was actually doing. All right, now the function itself only accepts one variable, and that is the symbol name. That is a string of letters. Now, a quick one here. I comment on this several times throughout all of my episodes. Just be aware that every MT5 broker has a slightly different way of identifying different types of symbols. For instance, if you're using a raw account and you're using IC markets, that's going to be something like BTC USD.A or USD JPY.A. For other brokers, it might be something like USD JPY.I or BTC USD.I. You'll need to check with your broker to see how they denote their different types of symbols and just make sure that your symbols match up to that. Okay, so first step in this initialize symbol function is to make sure that the symbol exists. Now, I've done this because as I've written and coded over the years, a lot of people have asked me for this, and this is just a really simple check that saves you a whole ton of time when you're troubleshooting. All that you do is you just download every single symbol that your particular broker's MT5 uses, and you just put it into a list. All right, really, really easy. And luckily, the MetaTrader 5 Python API has some great ways of making that really easy. So there you can see there, metatrader5.symbols_get gives you every single symbol. Now, that particular call actually gives you all of the information about a symbol that you might want. So you can get things like your pip size or maybe a whole bunch of other pieces of information that your broker wants to provide. For our purposes, all we want is that symbol name. So we just iterate through all of those symbols and we just extract the symbol names and put them into our symbol names list. Okay, the next thing, really, really easy in Python, we literally take our symbol variable and we ask the code, is this symbol name in our list of symbols? If it is, we continue. If not, we'll immediately notify the user to let them know that it's not there. And that'll be a prompt to you to maybe change and go and check with your broker what the symbol name should be. Okay, so if it exists, now we're going to attempt to initialize. Now, if you've been following this series from the start, you'll know that I always try to use the try and accept approach to doing this. It really makes your code a lot more fault tolerant. And as we get more advanced in future series, I'll show you how to implement custom error handling, which will make your code super robust. It'll make sure you don't fail halfway through some trades. But for now, we're just going to implement a simple try and accept. And if we come across an error, such as an error with initializing the symbol, we'll immediately tell you that that's what's happened. If it is successful, we'll return true. So you can see here, straight into the MT5 Python API, really, really straightforward with a really nice little print statement to tell you what's going on. Okay, and just a cheeky shout out there. If you do want to see more of this content, please take some time to subscribe to my channel. I love what I do, and subscribing really helps me to do that. Okay, and of course, if the symbol doesn't exist, we'll tell you that as well. I love this part. This is where we get to finally see our code in action. Now it's really, really straightforward. All we're going to do is be updating main.py. That's your main function, and in particular, the double underscore main double underscore part. So what are we going to do here? Well, all we're going to do is to import that function from MetaTrader 5 about initializing the symbols and run it and see if it returns back true, as in the symbol has been initialized. Here's how you do that. Okay, now we run it. Now you can see there that mine took a couple of seconds. I hadn't had MT5 open at that point in time, and we've got a double true, which, as you could probably tell if you read the code, true that MT5 started and true that our symbol was initialized. But wouldn't it be easier if we actually just told ourselves that we got a true for the initialized symbol? So let's do that now. Okay. Well, if you've been following the series so far, you'll know that in the previous episode, I talked about why it's so important and so helpful to have a separate startup function. It allows you to extract a whole bunch of things that need to happen at startup into their own function, which makes it easier to modify, but also helps you to not repeat yourself, which is one coding principle that's called dry, or do not repeat yourself. In this particular episode, we're going to expand that startup function to include initializing symbols. After all, if we can't initialize a symbol, we can't really do too many other things with the rest of our code. So let's do that now. You can see here I've already got the function, so I don't need to worry about all the commenting and everything like that. But what I do need is just to make sure that I make it compliant with our settings.py, which is something I cover in a previous episode as well. So what do? We update the function to say if startup, we print that MetaTrader startup was successful. That's great. Then we're going to initialize our symbols. So we extract our symbols array or list from our project settings, which is our JSON file. And then we iterate through that list and enable each symbol individually. Okay. If the outcome is successful, then we'll let ourselves know that that particular symbol was enabled. Doing it this way enables us to go through maybe 15 or 100 different symbols, depending on your broker, and let us know maybe there's only one symbol that fails. All the rest are going to get initialized. If it doesn't work, we immediately raise an exception or an error and let ourselves know, unfortunately, this was unable to get started. All right, now that we've updated our startup function, Let's update our double underscore main double underscore to remove the complexity and make it more straightforward. You can see when I run it, we've got everything that we need. We notify that MetaTrader starts up successfully and that our symbol, which in this case is USDJPY.A or the IC Markets Raw account, works. All we need to do to remove the complexity is delete those lines, run it again. With our main.py successfully initializing our symbols, we can start to get the data that we all came here for, the 50,000 candlesticks. To do this, return to your sudo MetaTrader 5 library, that is empty5 underscore lib.py, and let's start a brand new function. Now, I've called this function get candlesticks, and that's because I like to try and keep my code as easy to read as possible. And you're going to need three separate pieces of information. First of all, you need the symbol. That should be self-evident. Then you need to know what time frame you'd like to retrieve the candlesticks, and there's a number that MetaTrader 5 supports. And then you need to know the number of candles that you can retrieve. Now, in this particular thing, as I go ahead and comment the code as I always do, I'll quickly talk you through a couple of things. With MetaTrader, I've set the boundaries on this particular function as 50,000 candles, but the truth is you can get millions and millions of rows of data, which can be really handy if you want to backtest your function. The reason I've set it to 50,000 is that's kind of like the default settings that you get with MetaTrader. And I didn't want to go into detail about how you need to modify MetaTrader to allow you to get those millions and millions of rows. So just be aware that you can get way more than 50,000, but I've just set them just to make it easier for us. All right, back to the code. Okay, so the parameters, the first one is a string, which is the symbol name. The next one's going to be a string of the time frame, and the number of candles is going to be an integer. Out of that, we're going to return a data frame to the user which has all of the original data plus our our candlesticks that we're going to be doing. We will then use that data frame to get our exponential moving average in the next episode. So the first thing that we're going to do in this particular function is to do a quick check that there's no more than 50,000 candlesticks. Okay, if there is, we'll raise a value error. If not, we'll continue. Sneaky plug for my channel there. If you do want to learn how to do the 8 million candlesticks, subscribe. Okay, now when you're using MetaTrader 5, the kind of timeframes that you put in, the MetaTrader 5 has their own kind of object that they use for that. Now, to make it easier for me and easier hopefully for you, I've just created a little function that converts a string. So if you put an M1, which means the 1 minute time frame, this little function converts it into that MetaTrader 5 object, and then we pass that object into the function later on. The code here is kind of long and boring, so feel free to go to the GitHub repository, which I've linked in the description, to get the code. But I just walk you through the first couple of lines here just to show you what it does. Now, you can also kind of go through there, and I'll show you on the screen in a moment all the different timeframes that MetaTrader 5 kind of supports. Now, technically, you can like add in your own ones there if you want to, but that's a lot more advanced than we want to go through in this particular one here. All right, so set query time frame, pass in the time frame. I've put in the comments here, a function to implement a conversion. Okay, quick note there. So this, for those of you who are a little bit more advanced in your programming, you'll notice that I've kind of used the if and elif statements to implement a pseudo switcher. Python 3.10 does support switch statements, but 3.9 doesn't. So I've basically just put in the pseudo statement because that just makes it a lot more kind of backwards compatible, even though I recommend that you use Python 3.10 for this tutorial. Okay, here's a simple here's how it kind of works. So if the time frame equals M1, which is 1 minute time frame, return the MetaTrader 5 object. Okay, and then I've just copy and pasted all of the other different ones that MetaTrader kind of supports out of the box. Okay, at the bottom there's a error. If you put in the wrong time frame, like something that it doesn't recognize, it's going to let you know that as well. But like I said, go to the GitHub and download that code. There's all of the different time frames that it kind of comes with. Okay, back to our retrieving candlesticks function. So all we're going to do is pass that time frame variable for the function off to that little one, set query time frame, and get back the object that it needs to be. All right, so now we're using the candles equals MetaTrader 5 Python API. So we're going to use the function copy rates from position. You can see that I start the position at 1, not 0. That's because the 0th element is actually the candlestick that's currently getting built, which is probably not going to be useful for what we need to do for our code. Just be aware also that MetaTrader 5 has other ways of retrieving data. So for instance, you can give it a time frame range and it will retrieve all of them. I don't cover that in this episode. After that, we then want to convert our data that we get into a Pandas data frame. Now, if you're not across what a Pandas data frame is, I've linked it in the description. It's an amazing way to do data analysis, which is what we're all about when we're building our own MetaTrader 5 Python trading bot. So I've imported the library and we return that data frame. With our MT5 library updated, it's time to bring all of that functionality into main and start to retrieve the data for the symbols that we would like to get it for. Now, one of the really powerful ways about how I've set up this project is that the symbols array in your settings.json is set up in a way that you can basically put in as many symbols as your MetaTrader 5 broker supports. That can be really, really handy because if you develop an algorithm that works for one symbol, you may want to go and try that for a whole bunch of other symbols, maybe more profitable there or not. And this functionality allows you to do that really, really easily. So the first thing that we have to do is we extract our symbols from our project settings into their own little variable. And then with that variable, we iterate through it. And for each one of the symbols that we put in there, we're going to go and retrieve the candlesticks. Okay, you can see there that we're going to extract that into a candlesticks variable to store the data frame that gets returned from it. And then I'm going to get the time frame from the settings as well. Now, for those of you who are super advanced, I don't cover this in this series, but you could actually go through and get all sorts of different time frames as well. And I've certainly done that for some of the trading bots that I've built for clients in the past. Now, for our number of candlesticks, although this episode is about how to get 50,000, initially I'm just going to get 1,000. That's enough to make sure that my functionality is working. And then straight after this, I'm going to show you how to increase that to 50,000. Top tip, really, really easy. Okay, then we're going to print that data frame to the screen. Now, I'd like to double check that all of the columns are actually there. You can sort of see there how it's truncated some of them there. And, that's going to be really important as we start to implement things like an EMA cross or maybe some of the other bits and pieces that we might want to implement in our trading bot. So I'm just going to use a simple Pandas call that's kind of changes the settings on it. And I'm going to set display the columns to be a maximum of none, which effectively means display every column. There's no maximum number that you can display. Here's how you do that here. So pandas.set option, and then in there, display.max columns, and pass it the value none. If we run it again, okay, scroll up a little bit, and you can see that we've got all of our OHLC data there, including some other things we might want, like our tick volume as well. Getting 50,000 candles is as simple as changing the variable of number of candles. How good is that? In the next episode, I'll be showing you how to calculate an exponential moving average indicator.